So, again, today we're going to be talking about ADHD and procrastination. So, there's one question I want to start with, and that is, who is the biggest procrastinator in your life? Use the chat box to respond to that question because you're all here today because there is someone in your life who is a procrastinator. So, who is that? Is it yourself? Is it your child, your partner? Maybe it's your clients or your students. Perhaps it's your boss or your colleagues. It could be all of the above. Who is the biggest procrastinator? And Maria says, I'm the worst in my family. So, most of you here actually have said that you are the biggest procrastinator. So, we all have a procrastinator or more than one procrastinator in our lives. And for many of you, that procrastinator is yourself. So, we've all experienced it. And so, we know that 1 in 5 people are chronic procrastinators. So, although we have lots of procrastinators in our life, there are 1 in 5 people who are chronic procrastinators. This means that procrastination is persistent and at times even debilitating. Bonnie says we procrastinate with the most seemingly legit excuses. It's confusing, disheartening. I feel like we spin our wheels constantly trying. And I think that really gets to the root of why we're having this discussion today, Bonnie, that perhaps you are having chronic procrastination and you wonder, why am I experiencing this? And it can be, like Bonnie says, extremely frustrating. And the reason I think it's important we talk about this is because I've been working with individuals, both children and adults, with ADHD and weak executive function for 28 years. And the procrastination seems to be one of the biggest challenges that comes up all the time. So you may have a child and you think, why is my child always procrastinating when it comes to homework? He's so bright, he's so intelligent, he knows how to do the homework. If he would just start it, it would take him 5 minutes and we would be done. Instead, he procrastinates and it takes us 3 hours and a battle instead of just getting right to it, initiating the task and getting it done. Can any of you relate to that homework issue? Can you raise your hand or use the chat box to respond? Because I'm sure many of you have experienced that type. Lee says every night. Exactly. Or if you're here because of yourself, and many of you said you are concerned about your own procrastination, you might think, why can't I get things done? I know I have to get this task done. I know I can do the task. I want to do the task. I want to get it behind me. So why can't I get it done? Well, it's interesting to know that the word procrastination is derived from the ancient Greek word okrasia, and it means doing something against our better judgment. So even though we know we have to get a certain task done and we want to get it done, we don't want to put it off because we know that it's just going to cause stress and anxiety if we put it off. It's against our better judgment to put it off, and yet we still do procrastinate. And that's where a lot of the frustration comes in. And Ellen says, as a school counselor, I try to help parents navigate this daily battle. And that's that frustration level. Why does this occur? So, in order to change procrastination, in order to learn how to initiate rather than procrastinate, we actually have to have a better understanding of what causes it. And many of us here today think that the root cause is time management. I just don't have any time management skills, and that's why I procrastinate. And that may be a factor, but there may be another cause. So, in order to understand the cause, let's talk about the tasks that cause us to procrastinate. So go ahead and type in the chat box one more time for me. Which task makes you or your partner or your child, which task makes you most likely to procrastinate? Let's share that. And as you are, oh, yeah, um, uh, Marianne says when there are multiple steps involved. I can tell you one of the tasks right now that's in my inbox currently. Well, it's snoozed because I snoozed it because I'm procrastinating, is that tax organizer. The tax organizer, I received that probably 3 weeks ago, and I just keep pushing snooze. Remind me on Saturday. Remind me in another week. I keep procrastinating because it is that task that every year, every January, I procrastinate. So let's see what else you're procrastinating. Mine is the tax organizer. Annie says big projects. Gay says housework. Skylar says anything boring. Um, let's see. Steve says anything that I don't like to do or is hard to do. Kristen says something I don't want to do or something I don't want to start. And so now you're kind of getting to the root cause already. Ellen says starting is usually the biggest obstacle, just getting started. Nancy says anything that is due now. Uh, Chris, Christine says, oh, yeah, you're not going to see the chat, so I'm going to read those to you. Rebecca says, any difficulty writing is any difficult writing tasks for me. Peg says, decluttering piles and piles of paper. Maria says, applications, especially complex ones. Tulin says, tasks I don't feel confident enough. Pete says organizing, scanning, paperwork, perfectionism. That plays a role. Giletia says sitting down to study. Melissa, cleaning. Bonnie says follow up tasks for my job, but these are vital. I love and enjoy the hands on pay part of my job. Paperwork is a drag. Naomi, clearing my desk, which looks like a patchwork quilt. Deborah says projects with paper, details, insurance, reimbursements, taxes, even renovations, details. Excellent. So, and goes on and on. I don't have time to read them all. Esther says doing my CV. Robert says things without immediate reward. So all of you have written in really good examples. So we absolutely can all relate to procrastination. We can specifically cite certain tasks that cause us to procrastinate. So why? Why, if you look at what you just wrote, why are you procrastinating when it comes to those tasks? Is it your personality? Because a lot of times when you are procrastinating, that sometimes labels occur. People might say that you're just unmotivated or that you're lazy or you don't care. Maybe you're just disorganized or have a fear of failing. Someone here brought up procrastination, perfectionism. That does often play a role. But what about the unmotivated and the lazy and that you don't care? Is that really true? I used to hear that when I was in a school setting. I would hear a lot of teachers who would say, oh, he just doesn't do any of his assignments because he's just completely unmotivated or lazy. And I can tell you, I rarely came across a student who was truly just lazy and didn't care. Usually they absolutely want to do well. It's just that they're struggling in other areas. So that's why we have to get to the root cause. Why is that procrastination occurring? Is it that you're just lazy or unmotivated? Is that truly why you are not taking on that task? Or is it because of weak executive function? Now, we know that executive function is a set of mental processes, that it's the CEO of your brain. It's what allows you to control your attention, your behaviors, your emotions, allows you to plan and prioritize, organize, avoid procrastination, and remain on task. So these are mental processes that we do every day. However, they tend to be weakest for individuals with ADHD. And So if we look at the processes of executive function, look how many of those processes are directly tied to procrastination. Procrastination is the inability to plan and prioritize and organize and focus on a single task. So, all of these bubbles that are on the right hand side of procrastination, these are mental processes which are part of executive function that are required to initiate a task, but they tend to be very difficult for individuals with weak executive function. So we know that we need to improve executive function. And you probably have already decided because I know many of you here. Marnie says organizing. That's one of her difficulties. And that's what causes her to procrastinate because she has a difficult time organizing. Even Melissa, she brings up the second one here, which is prioritizing. She says, stuck in overwhelm, not sure what is the first priority. And then she brings up the very next part of the puzzle, and that's emotion regulation. Melissa says, emotion regulation has paralyzed me at times. And that is exactly what happens when we are procrastinating many times. Research has shown that procrastination is directly related to emotion regulation. So many of you may have already known this, but that might be a new perspective for some of you. So it's less about your ability to manage your time and more about how you feel about that task. I can tell you that is why I am avoiding and procrastinating when it comes to that tax organizer. I do not enjoy it. And so it is the emotional part that is causing my procrastination. So Pete says, please explain emotion regulation. So that's a really good question. So emotion regulation, or in this case, emotion dysregulation, is where you may tend to have a very large emotional response to something that may be very small. So we often see this, or that you may have a very big emotional response to a certain situation. And then you can, so Pete says, how can I recognize this? And so if you've had if it's for you personally, you might have a really big emotional response to something. And then later on, when you have time to sit back and reflect about that situation, you might think of several different ways you could have responded that probably would have been more appropriate. Or if it's your child, you might recognize it in your child in that something very small happens. And all of a sudden, they have a very big emotional response. It might be something very small as, well, we have to wait 10 more minutes before we can actually start that project. And although 10 minutes is not that long and it's a very small adjustment, they have a huge emotional response because they are having a hard time regulating that. So, Pete, let me know if that makes sense. And if you want more information, I can send you another webinar that we have or an ebook specifically on emotion regulation. Okay, great. I will share that with you. Yes, anyone who would like that information, I will definitely share that with you. You can just type in emotion regulation or send, and I'll make certain that you get that. Okay. All right. So we have to look at that aspect of emotion regulation because this is really important when we're stepping back. And remember, we're trying to figure out how to start initiating rather than procrastinating. So this is important because you may have wired your brain to procrastinate. That emotion dysregulation that you or your partner or your students or your child is experiencing may have actually caused you to wire your brain to procrastinate. Now, that act of wiring your brain is known as neuroplasticity. We know that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable, and we can create new neural pathways. Now, a lot of times we say that in a positive way, right? You can really, you can learn new skills and you can learn positive things by creating new neural pathways. And you create new neural pathways by the repetition of perceptions or thought patterns or actions, practice. And so usually we tend to go for the positive, but it's also possible to create new neural pathways that are negative by repeating to ourselves negative perceptions, negative thought patterns, negative actions. And by actually repeating these over and over and over again, you're creating these new neural pathways in the brain. If we look at that as kind of like making a pathway through a field that you see here, let's say that I have to get from where I am now to that other side of the field. So I start walking one day, I start making a path. And the more I repeat that path over and over, the first day it's a little bit hard, right? Because there's no path there and I have to make my way through. There's lots of high grass around me, lots of wheat, and I have to get through a few little obstacles to make my way to the other part of the field. But if I repeat this for days and weeks and months, suddenly I have this clear path. I've repeated that same path over and over and over again. And now I've created the path of least resistance, right? So I'm always going to go down this path because this is the easiest way for me. I've created that. I've created this path. And that's exactly what you're doing in your brain when you create these new neural pathways. You're creating new pathways in your brain from the repetition of perceptions and actions and thought patterns. So, if we look at that when it comes to procrastination, I'm going to use my student here. And you can perhaps relate to this as your child who's avoiding homework. A lot of you said that's a big area where procrastination occurs. And if you don't have a child, it may be yourself. You might, or a child who's procrastinating doing homework. Think about something that you're really procrastinating when it comes to all of those things that you brought up earlier. So you can think of this scenario in the same way. But let's take our student to begin. So your child sits down and sees that homework in front of him, and he starts that thought pattern. He starts that perception. It's boring. It's too hard. I'm going to fail. Now we've started creating that path. And then the next day, that homework comes and he creates that path even more. It's boring. It's too hard. I'm going to fail. So you continue to repeat those perceptions and those thought patterns over and over and over again. I may even leave my homework and go over and play Minecraft or watch a TikTok video to get some instant gratification. That procrastination then gives me a little bit of a mood elevator, right? Because I was able to avoid the task that I don't want to do and do something else. And then I come back and I start that mantra over and over and over again. So, just like we talked about, the more I repeated that path through that field of wheat, the more I continued going over and over and over that path every day, I had this nice path in the end that I always went down because it was the easiest to take. And now your child is doing the same thing. It's boring. It's too hard. I'm going to fail over and over and over again. He's now created this new neural pathway in the brain that's the easiest one for him to take every single time. Or for you, it's the easiest path now for you to take every time. And that's why you think, why can't he start his homework and just get it done? He could do it in 10 minutes. Why are we procrastinating every single time? And that's because these created that new neural pathway. And if that continues for days or weeks or months or years, this procrastination can continue throughout his school career. And not only, as we've been talking, does procrastination affect your child as he or she goes through school, but it procrastinates you as an adult. It can affect your career, your home life, your relationships. Of course, when it comes to your career, uh, Amber says, yeah, I was and am this child still doing it. So that brings me right here to this point, Amber. You're absolutely right that if you're creating that in childhood, you're probably bringing this into adulthood. And then it can affect your career because you are procrastinating when it comes to certain work tasks so that you're only getting those tasks done at the very last minute when you are completely stressed out. And I know that a lot of my clients have said to me, but I work better under stress. And you mean you can get it done when you're under stress, but is that really how you want to live your life? Is that ideal to always have to have that stressful moment in order to get things done? And it can affect your career in that you're not able to complete things because you procrastinate so much that you don't get things done in a timely manner, or you don't complete things in maybe at the level that they expect. Okay. Kristen says, yes, I work better under stress was my college mantra. And so it can affect you there. It can affect you at home in your home life when your house looks like complete chaos and you cannot find anything because you've maybe avoided some of your tasks you need to do at home. It can affect your relationships in that you may be not having some difficult conversations that you know need to take place, but you think that it's just easier to avoid it than to really work through a resolution. Or you may be perceived as the person who doesn't follow through on their promises. And that might not be really your intent, but because you procrastinate, it appears that you're one that doesn't care or doesn't follow through. Okay. So if it is so important and it's affecting our children, our students, our clients, if it's affecting our home life, our relationships as adults, uh, M says it causes resentment between my husband and I when I procrastinate. So we know that we want to take care of it. So one of the first things we need to get a hold of is our emotion regulation. Okay. And that emotion regulation we've already determined is a critical component. Some of you brought that up even in the beginning when I asked you what task causes you to procrastinate. And many of you said tasks that appear to be too difficult or appear that they're going to take too long. So we have to get hold of our emotions in order to initiate. And one step that we can take, and there's a lot of steps that you can take to get to this end goal, but we're going to talk about how to develop a growth mindset. That's one step. That's one goal we can make today in order to start initiating rather than procrastinating. And there are many strategies you can use to develop a growth mindset. But I'm going to give you one strategy today because I want you to be able to walk away from today's session and take action. So, we're going to talk about something that you can start on today to avoid procrastination. So, let's talk about the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. The fixed mindset is one where you're constantly having that negative mantra we talked about earlier, right? I can't do it. It's going to be hard. It's going to take too long. And that is that fixed mindset. It is very difficult for us to move in any other direction when we have that one thought pattern. The growth mindset is a contrast. Instead of looking at a challenge ahead of you and saying, I can't do it, it's too hard, and just shutting down there, a growth mindset says, I can do it with the right strategy. So there are several ways, like I said, on how you can develop a growth mindset. But one is what the psychologist Dan Siegel calls name it to tame it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the process of naming your emotions and identifying your feelings. Because if you do this, if you name your emotions and identify the feelings you're having around this particular task, then you can diffuse that emotional charge. So, there are some steps we can take, and one is by prompting questions. There are a series of prompting questions that can help develop the growth mindset. And I'm going to take you step by step through an example of how you can use these question prompts in an actual scenario. And I'm going to use that homework assignment scenario. But again, if you are thinking about yourself as an adult, you can easily adjust these prompt questions to the task that you're struggling with. Okay. Christine wonders if I can share my slides because they're helpful. And I can share the slides, but I also have an ebook that I'll include on our email follow-up because if you want these prompting questions, it will include these prompting questions in there for you, okay? So then you'll be able to refer back when you want to start this growth mindset. So let's think about using those prompting questions to develop a growth mindset when it comes to that homework situation. What I would typically say to my clients is in the white, and then the black is an example of their response. So here we are struggling with homework, and I say, what do you think is going to happen during homework time that you can't deal with? And my student may say, well, the assignment's going to be too hard. Well, why do you think that? Well, because I heard fifth grade math is hard. So what are you afraid of? That the kids will laugh at me if I get the wrong answer. So now I'm using these prompting questions to actually start naming it to tame it. So now we've named it, right? I'm procrastinating. I'm avoiding this situation because I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be hard because that's what I've heard. I've heard fifth grade math is hard. And if I get something wrong, the other kids are going to laugh at me. So we've already identified all of these emotions surrounding this task. So let's talk about strategies, right? So again, developing that growth mindset. What strategies can I apply to move forward? So, what strategies should you try? I should start doing the first math problem. And if I get stuck or have questions, I can ask someone. I can ask someone to help me, right? And that's really critical because we know that once you can take that first step, usually you're very successful at completing the task at hand, right? It's just taking that initial step. And how can you keep these challenges from standing in your way? How can we take that strategy and continue applying it? Well, need to continue doing my best and focus on what I can do. And then when I have any struggles, I ask for help. So now we've kind of come up with a plan. We know why procrastination is taking place, and we're shifting that thought pattern. So now we have a strategy. So we're not going to continue going down this negative mindset. We're actually going to open up that growth mindset and have a strategy to apply. And I know there are a couple of things that may occur during this. One, you may be working with an older, maybe a teenager, an older child, and you're thinking, he's never going to answer me, or my daughter will never give me these responses. And so, what you'll want to do in those scenarios is model, why are you avoiding this? And then you can, if they say, I don't know, then you can, use prompts or model it. Well, I find that I typically avoid things when I feel like I'm not going to get it done. Or, me, someone here brought up procrastination. And that's a very common reason we procrastinate because we have that perfectionism and we know that we're not going to, or we feel like we're not going to be perfect in this task. So we procrastinate. And so you might model that if your child's a perfectionist. Sometimes I feel like I'm not going to do the task perfectly, so I want to avoid it. So really start modeling. And even if you think that they're not listening to you, they are. So if you're not getting those answers, try more prompting and then model that process. Because if you model that process, it's really going to help them work through whatever difficulties they're having. Okay. Also, as you go through this process, remember that you want to positively reinforce the process and the good things that they're doing. So when you talk about what should you try, and your child says, well, I should just get started. And if I'm confused or I'm stuck, I should ask you what to do next. Great. So then when you see your child actually using that strategy, positively reinforce. It was great the way you got started right away. And when you got stuck, you asked for help. That was really good. So make certain that you follow up and provide extra reinforcement for applying that strategy. And that's something we need to discuss as well, because they may apply the strategy, but failure may occur, right? It might happen that we take all of these positive steps and failure occurs. And that's okay. It's going to happen. And so we just want to make a plan to deal with that. So, one of the things you want to do is make certain that you focus more on the effort, right? Than the end. We want to talk about the effort that was put into it. So, even though we may not have done the best, we did have great effort. So, what was a good part of the effort? So, focus on that and make certain that you talk about the effort. So, what did you do really well that helped you? And have that conversation. Okay, so those were great. We're going to continue doing those. What did you try that did not help you or was not something that you would do again? And have that conversation. Have that time for reflection. I thought these things were really good. You put in a great effort and specifically identify the positives and things you want to improve. So you move past that failure point because, again, failure is going to happen. So just be prepared for it and help your younger child or your students or clients work through that. And remember to do this for yourself as well. So as you're going through this process, be prepared for failure and be prepared to work through that. So, developing a growth mindset is one way we can help ourselves with controlling that emotion regulation and improving our ability to initiate a task. It helps us focus on what is within our control, helps us be proactive instead of reactive, helps us develop those positive feelings, right? Because the more positive we are, and we repeat that positivity over and over, we're going to create those positive neural networks. And it allows us to initiate rather than procrastinate. So, as I mentioned, I want you to be able to walk away from today and take some steps to avoid procrastination. So, what can you do? Let's look at that. First, this is my challenge to you. I want you to all select one task and start working on a path to success. So, it could be one of those tasks that you talked about above, And it may be for yourself, or it may be a task that you're going to work on with your child or your students. And so I want you to select one task. Think about it. Maybe you'll just jot something down right now. One task you want to improve, just one. We don't want to start with too many. And then we're going to work towards developing that growth mindset. So I want you to use those prompting questions. First of all, identify the emotions surrounding that. Why do you feel this way? Go through those questions, name it to tame it, and then let's come up with a strategy. Okay, these are the emotions that surround it. What is the reality? And what are some of the strategies that we can take? You want to focus more on the gratification of completing the task rather than the burden of getting through it, right? So look at that goal and focus on that rather than the burden of getting through it. So I want you all to think about that process, and I'm going to share with you. Okay, so Steve says he's going to select tax work. Boring, lengthening. Reality, there's a deadline. Step one, organize the paperwork. So, Steve, you have the beginning of your plan. So now you can take some action. Very good. All right. So I'm going to share with you one thing that I've done recently where I took exactly what we're talking about, that growth mindset, and making certain that I did not procrastinate. So recently, I have developed frozen shoulder. I don't know if any of you here have ever had frozen shoulder or experienced that, or maybe someone else has, but it's adhesive capsulitis, and it is very painful. And so about 4 weeks ago, I could only raise my arm about here. So it's where your body, you might have like an injury, and then your body decides to help you out by immobilizing it. And then you cannot move your arm. So, and it's very painful. So I went to the doctor and we talked about it, talked about the causes, and then he told me that I was going to go through, several weeks of pain. And in order to get my movement back, it was going to take 1 to 3 years. So I felt in that moment that he was setting me up for a fixed mindset because I said, I am not going to take 1 to 3 years. I will give this 3 months. And he told me, I need you to lower your expectations. So, right there, he was setting me up to have that fixed mindset. I needed to lower my expectations. This is going to take me 1 to 3 years. And if I walked into that and started developing that fixed mindset, then it would be very easy for me to procrastinate, actually working on getting better. And because it was going to be hard, it was going to be painful, it was going to take time, it was going to be an expense to the physical therapist. And so there are all these reasons to develop a fixed mindset and procrastinate. But I didn't want it to take 1 to 3 years. So I decided that I was going to start right away. I called the physical therapist. I started doing what they recommended, but then I've also started my own things. So I have done some modified yoga. It's not pretty, but I've done modified yoga. I'm doing visualization every morning, every evening, visualizing this leaving me. And then also I've started doing some qigong. So all of that combined has really helped me. And I will show you. I can raise my arm now, which is really great. So I've worked through it, and I have a lot more movement than I actually thought I would be able to within a short amount of time. Uh, Maria says Tai Chi is great too. I agree with you. And so that just shows you, and I'm not giving you medical advice. I am not a medical doctor. So although those things helped me, I do think that you should start with a growth mindset, but then you should follow whatever medical doctors tell you or the path that's right for you. But that's what worked for me. I decided that I was going to have a positive growth mindset and I was not going to procrastinate. I was going to start right away. And I've gotten really positive results. So Oh, thank you. And some of you are giving me some really good options as well. So I'm going to look into all of that because I still have a ways to go. So again, I want you, that was just a personal experience I've had because I thought about in that moment, thought about this conversation that we were going to have today and how I could apply that to myself. So I want you now to apply this to your own life. Take some steps to develop that growth mindset and initiate rather than procrastinate. Now, also, that's one piece of it, right? We talked about the emotion regulation as one part of executive function. But then we also have to talk about all of these other processes of executive function that we need to improve. That initiation, right? We're going to improve initiation. So we need to be able to prioritize, organize, remain on task, all of these other processes of executive function. And we can do that within play attention. Play attention actually specializes in pinpointing foundational skills in order to improve executive function. And we do this in a very unique way in that once we look at the areas of weaknesses, which may be the ability to focus and filter distractions, working memory might be difficult, being able to control your impulsivity, just filtering distractions, starting and completing in a timely manner. Those are all examples of cognitive skills, underlying cognitive skills that lay the foundation for strong executive function. So once we pinpoint all of those foundational skills, we can then take that information and set up a program to improve those foundational skills that are required for strong executive function. And then by improving executive function, improving your ability to initiate. And we do this in a very unique way in that we integrate that feedback technology with cognitive skill training and behavior shaping to provide you with the most comprehensive approach available. So, the body wave armband that you see on the screen right now, on the back, there are 3 sensors. And those 3 sensors, when I slide that on my arm, those 3 sensors now actually monitor my brain activity that tells us how attentive I am. And then that information is given over to the computer where I'm allowed to control all of the cognitive exercises, the exercises that help me strengthen my ability to focus, to filter distractions, to remember chunks of information. All of those skills, all of those exercises are brain enabled, meaning I have to be paying attention in order to activate the activity. If I'm not paying attention, then the activity will stop or the character will go in the wrong direction, and I have to focus back in order to continue. And the reason we do this is because we know the very first catalyst necessary for brain change is attention. You can have a great teacher, you can have a great life coach, but if you're having a hard time paying attention to that individual and that process, it can be very difficult to get maximum benefit. So that's why we make certain that no matter what skill you're working on within play attention, you have to be actively engaged. And through this very systematic approach, we're helping you develop that foundational skills that are required for strong executive function. And you will be assigned a personal executive function coach to help you every step of the way. Now, there are a lot of questions that are coming in. So if I don't answer your question right now, please stay with me because I am going to get to all of your questions. But one of the questions is, does it work for adults? This is for anyone from the age of 5 all the way up through 105. So absolutely, it's good for both children and adults. And as I said, we're going to pinpoint those foundational skills and help you improve executive function. Now, we've been talking a lot about different areas of executive function, and some of you may know the areas in which you've struggled and you know your end goal, what you'd like to improve. But some of you may have some questions about that. And if you do want more information about yourself or your partner or your child, we do have the brief available, which is an assessment that we can use in order to help pinpoint the foundational skills we want to put into your plan. So, the brief assessment is a behavior rating inventory of executive function. And it's a series of questions. And at the end of the assessment, we receive a full report that gives us a really good snapshot of your executive function on a day to day basis. And then we can use that information to actually start developing a customized neurocognitive training plan for you. So, we have the brief available, and then we also have the focus assessment available, which is a norm reference test of attentional control. If you're interested in any of those assessments or learning more about the assessments, you can type in assessment and one of our advisors or I myself may follow up with you in order to answer your questions about the assessment process if you want any more information on that. But as I said, many of you may already know the areas you want to improve. So we can use that information in order to start developing plan of action, because that's really what this whole discussion was about: taking action, knowing the root cause, getting to the root cause, and then working on a plan. Okay, so that is really critical. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time and attention and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you so much.